Welcome all to another session in our Women Lead webinar series. I'm Michelle Bergquist, your host today, and we are delighted yet again to bring our webinar series to our Association of Professional Women. Our webinar series are designed for you, the professional leader in business, whether you're a woman owner, if you are a current and aspiring women leader. We are really looking to bring topics and themes that support your goal to lead, achieve, and succeed more effectively in business. I am super delighted today to say that our leading lady today is a woman that I respect, admire, and she is absolutely a powerhouse in business. And our topic today is unconscious bias. Our leading lady, who I'm delighted to introduce, is Sahar Andrade, and she is the founder of Sahar Consulting, and she specializes in diversity and inclusion. And this topic, I think, for all of us as women is extremely important. So Sahar, say hello and just welcome all of our attendees, and delighted to have you on the webinar today.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone. I am so delighted to be here sharing this webinar with you, especially that it's one of the very first ones. So I guess we are pioneers, Michelle.
I like that word, Sahar. I want to be a pioneer. Let's go with that.
Right? Or maverick.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Well, I'm delighted today to share with you some information about what unconscious bias is. And this is a subject that, because of even the era that we live in right now, or even in the workplace for ages, we never really paid close attention to what unconscious bias is, or even in our social relationship with others. And sometimes we say words that we don't even think about, or because unconscious bias is like an automatic response. So I'm delighted to share some information about it today, and to also share a little bit of very simplified neuroscience about it. So because when we know the root of what's happening and why it's happening, we can actually stop it, or we can change the attitude, or we can change the behavior that is related to it.
I love where you're going with that, Sahar.
It just, like, for me, unconscious bias is just a big subject for me to go. So I'm trying to move these slides here. And this is, like, as you can see, this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to define issues. We're going to define what is unconscious bias, discuss the neuroscience and what bias at work, and definitely what its negative effects, and also how do we solve that, some of the solutions that we have. So I'm sure that at a certain time, and this is something that probably was said to me at a certain time or the other, is like, someone will tell me, is like, when are you going to have kids? You're not getting any younger, you know? Or someone will tell me, oh, you are very articulate for an Egyptian. And we hear that, and just like, oh, your accent is so cute. Or one of the big ones that we hear it everywhere is like, you really look good for your age. Like, if this is supposed to be a compliment.
Wow.
And we keep hearing that, and sometimes even we hear, oh my God, this is so gay. And we don't realize how these words can offend someone. Not only offend someone, but actually hurt someone. And we don't realize, we think it's a joke, and we think it's funny. We think this is something that, oh, you know what, I'm just being your pal. And actually it's not that. And we need to start thinking for a second, what is it, and how our expressions and how our reactions are affecting other people. So without further delay, let's start talking about what unconscious bias is. Unconscious bias, I want you to know, first of all, that every single one of us, no matter how open-minded we are, have unconscious bias. So it's not something is like, oh, it's yucky just for the bad people. No, and we all have unconscious bias, but it's what we do with it. It's exactly like we all have anger, is what we do with the anger. As our brain is wired as a survival tool to see patterns together. So our brain doesn't have the time, because it works really, really fast. It doesn't have the time to specify different details. Our perceptions, meaning our realities, but they don't have to be the other people's perceptions or realities, because perception is how we see the world. And how we see the world is colored by the lenses that we see the world through. And they are shaped by our beliefs and our behaviors that in first hand we get from our parents. So, but we forget that other people have different lenses as well. And if our parent had blind spots, that's what we call blind spots, which is basically unconscious bias or the beginning of unconscious bias, we get them. And what do? We pass them to our children, and it becomes worse. And then our children pass them to their children, and it becomes worse. So I always explain the word blind spot, like if when we're driving, if we get into an accident because of a blind spot, it might not be our fault, but it's definitely our responsibility. And that's why it's our responsibility to understand and know what our blind spots are, which is basically unconscious bias. And it's important also to know, because our brain first function is to defend us, is to protect us, and that's why it keeps us in the comfort zone. So whenever we start kind of diverting from what we do every single day or what we are used to, our brain starts regurgitating every single bad experience that we ever had in our life, or every single bad experience that we saw someone else have, or even that we saw on a TV in a movie, and so it can keep us in place. So it can keep us controlled, so we can basically protect ourselves from getting hurt. So our brain instinctively works against diversity. And that's why sometimes we get into being unconsciously biased. And bias, by the way, unconscious bias can be explicit and implicit, meaning like explicit, that means that it's very overt and people know what they are doing and they're just articulating it either in words or in their body language. And it could be implicit, meaning is like they don't even mean that. And sometimes, like I said in the introduction, that people feel that they're funny and they're saying a joke, and that's why they're doing that. And it's important to know that based on our assumptions and based on our perceptions, we actually take decisions. And our decisions include what we say and how we deal and how we act or interact with the people around us. And that's probably what is the most dangerous part of unconscious bias. We deduce from the information available to us. And that's why we don't perceive the object in isolation. And we need to remember that we see the world as we are, not as it is. And this is crucial for us to understand that however we look at the world or we perceive it is not necessarily the truth for other people, but it's only for us. And one important thing that I always like to say is we need to understand that people act and react based on what they know best. So even if it doesn't agree with us, even if we don't understand it, but people do whatever they know how, or they ever learned what it is. So blind spots requires a shift on how we think about other people that we perceive are different. It will help us make sense of the world around us and the decisions that we make unaware of them. So it's possible to be unconsciously biased about different things, and being unconscious bias has different components to it and different kinds. So some people have unconscious bias against age, against gender, against sexual orientation, against accents, against weight, against height. And our brain, because it wants to keep us in the comfort zone, it will circulate around the people that look like us, that speak like us, that think like us, that believe in the same things that we believe in, because it still wants us to be into the comfort zone. Moving along. One of the things that we have inside of us, for example, is like a lot of people would like to travel into a car. It's easier for us to drive, and a lot of people have a fear of flying. And the real statistics show that for every point of percentage of car accidents, it's a flight accident. But people don't realize that. It's just an unconscious bias that they want to drive, so they think they are more in control of their destiny. Another thing is this: what are we most afraid of? Are we most afraid of a mosquito? Or are we most afraid of an elephant? Or are we most afraid of a shark? You know, and actually,
I'm going with the mosquito, just so you know.
With the You'll be surprised how many people will answer Michelle and say it's the shark. You know, and it's, believe it or not, the World Health Organization estimates that more than 1 million people die because of mosquito bites a year. And that the chances that you get bit by a shark are the same chances that a coconut falls on your head.
Wow.
So that, you know what? So that tells you, you know, that again, the unconscious it's because it's something that we have ingrained in our brain, and that's why we act and react this way.
Wow.
For example, if two men, same experience, same skills, same talent, same everything, they go into a job interview. One of them is 6 feet or 6'1" or 6'2", and the other one is 5'10". Statistics have shown that the man that is 6'2", first of all, will get hired 10 times over the one that is 5'10". Not only that, he will get 1.5% increase in salary than what they would have offered the 5'10". Just height. I mean, let's face it, when two people go into for a job interview, to get a job interview, we look even at the way they're dressed. We look at the way they talk. We look at the way, and that's why in interviewing people, there is a lot of things to watch for that has to do with bias. Do they look like the people that are interviewing them? And that's why we always suggest that when you have a panel that interview people, have different diverse people on that panel. So it will not be biased towards a certain gender or a certain age or a certain ethnicity or race. And that's why, you know, diversity becomes important here, so we can make sure that bias doesn't come in, because there are different things when we start talking about bias. So let's talk a little bit about the root of why we get unconscious bias. And for me, I love talking about that, and because it's the fascination of how our brain works and how we can make it work actually to our own advantage. There are filters that our brain has filters that the information sips through. And the information that we are exposed to at any time of the day is between 4 million and 5 million pieces of information. Our brain can only understand 40 to 50 pieces, but can deal with only 4 or 5 at any certain time. So we go from 4 million, 5 million to only 4 or 5 pieces of information that our brain can digest at any 1 minute. And that's why it does shortcuts. It comes back to its first function, to protect us, to defend us. So it makes shortcuts, and it makes instant decisions. And why it does that? Because we need to put things that we look at in categories right away. We have to put them in these boxes, in what we call the schemas, because we don't have the time to spend. Our brain works in parallel ways, and unfortunately, believe it or not, our brain never changed from the caveman time. So throughout these millions of years, we still have inside of our brain that instant that we have an animal running behind us. We have to make sure to protect ourselves so we can survive. So that's why we are always in a survival mode. That's why our brain till now reacts in the what we call the 3F modes, which is fight, flight, or freeze. But the beauty is that modern science, because we are talking about now unconscious bias, we are talking about how to stop it, how to realize it. And by the way, emotional intelligence becomes huge on how to handle unconscious bias. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So now science tells you, yes, we have 3Fs, but because we have choices as human beings on how we react to whatever is thrown in our life, there is also a 4th F, which is fly. So we can take everything, either fight, flight, or freeze, but we can take it to, and change it to our own advantage and fly with it. But because we do these short cuts in a very milliseconds and assumptions, we can actually get wrong whatever we look at a lot of time, and we judge people based on our filters, based on our perceptions, based on what we see as right or wrong, based on what we see what is valid and what's not valid. And that's why we call them the in-groups. That's why we favor people that look like us, and that's more or less, that's the basis of unconscious bias. And I talked for a minute ago about why emotional intelligence is important in unconscious bias. Emotional intelligence is unconscious bias because, as we know, emotional intelligence has 2 parts, personal and social, but here I'm going to talk about the personal part. And it starts by self-awareness and ends with self-management. So self-awareness, it's important to understand what are our triggers, what makes us happy, what makes us sad, what makes us mad, what ticks us off, and what basically pushes our buttons. And when we know that, knowing how it manifests in our body, like when I see someone looking a certain way that is different than mine, and I know it triggers a certain reaction in me, how does my body react? Does my heart rate goes faster? Do I start feeling blood going to my brain, to my head? Do I start feeling like I'm breathing faster? How does it manifest in me physically? And how can I calm myself? And that's why when we can break the cycle of actually unconscious bias. So because I know we have a limited time, let me start talking about what the negative impacts that we have can affect us in the workplace. First of all, we need to understand that in whatever workplaces that we have, discrimination has a lot of places have zero tolerance for it. But when we have unconscious bias, people don't even realize that. So some of the negative effects is, first of all, unconscious bias can go unnoticed, and it's not easy to fix, and it can be systematic, even go unnoticed, because it's difficult to identify is just as to correct. So it can happen, conscious bias can happen between managers and employees, or for example, people that work on the field versus people that work in the offices, between customers, employees, citizen or immigrant workers, for decision makers, even that can promote someone with no merit, and that's what we call positive bias, or hold someone back from a promotion. Like, for example, they look at, if they know that a female is ready to get promoted, but she is getting married. So they assume that she's going to be busy, she's going to get pregnant, and she's not going to be able to travel, and that job requires a lot of traveling. So automatically, without even thinking, they will not even consider her for the job. They will not offer her. They will not even ask her if it's okay, can you do that? Or how do you see we can work with that? But they will just take her off, the names that are ready for promotions. Or, for example, physically challenged people, they assume right away that they have a disability, and that's why they're not going to be able to do the job the way they want it to be done. And all these are wrong perceptions, and this is what we call unconscious bias. I remember one time we were interviewing people for an assistant job, and a quadriplegic person came in, and we assumed, we looked at each other, and we didn't know what to say. So we asked them, well, the job has some typing, and we didn't know how to say it. We felt uncomfortable. Why? Because we had anxiety, because we were out of our comfort zone and we didn't know how to deal with it. And you know what? He said, sure. He picked up with his teeth something from his pocket. It was like a big baton that you open, and he started typing, and he was actually a very fast typer, and he did get the job. And that's what I'm saying. We cannot, that's how the bias in workplaces evolve. And also, unconscious bias is the first level that can lead to stereotyping and discrimination. And that's why it's important to catch it at the get-go. For example, when we have discrimination in the workplace, people feel that they are not valued. And when they feel they're not valued, they feel like they don't want to be there, and that's why the Gallup research showed that there are 28% of our workforce are actively disengaged, and only less than 30% are engaged. So whatever the difference between the 29% engaged and the 28 actively disengaged are disengaged, because people are not valued for who they are. Because people feel they can only be valued if they become whoever they want them to be. And that creates a hostile environment that leads to absenteeism, to turnover, to sick leaves, to drop productivity, to conflicts, to lawsuits. And the lawsuits doesn't only lose money for this organization, but also lose reputation, where in the future they will not be able to attract, recruit, or even retain qualified, diverse employees. That's the same thing. For example, they found out that CVs that had male names are more highly rated than female names. So an experiment has been done where they presented resumes with no names whatsoever, and it actually balanced itself out when it came to gender, when it came to ethnicity, and when it came to choosing people regardless of who they are, their background, and how they even looked. There is lower selection. We know that there is a lower selection rates of applicants from some groups in the recruiting process. And what happens usually is that the existing leaders clone either new leaders that are up and becoming or job holders. And the low performance ratings is awarded, they look at, these groups are lower performance historically, and that's why we are not going to promote them, or we are not going to give them the proper development or training. There is even higher incidence of disciplinary action among some groups, or lack of self-insight or awareness even on how to motivate people that are different. And I'm not saying here that this is the case in every single organization that we go through, but even if it's 5% in our workplaces, it has no place to be. Because we need to understand the word of inclusion, that we need to include all of us as employees included into the workforce. And these are mainly, at the end, we need to understand that diversity and inclusion and even unconscious bias cost us money. So we also look like a certain, the gender or certain ethnic groups are excluded from formal or informal networking, or denied mentoring. And this is, or what we call the glass ceiling that is put on certain categories of workforce. Treating normal differences of opinion sometimes as confrontational or being insubordinate, or describing normal communication as rude or aggressive, or punishing someone for not getting along with someone else, when one of the reasons for detention is actually racially discrimination attitudes of behavior of the other employee. So hopefully this is something that we never see in the workplace, or at least we can nip it in the bud. And that's why we need to start talking about solutions right now. And this is what I'm going to do. And you can see on the on the slide that I have, there is actually a link to a UCLA research that has been done about implicit bias, and it's amazing. It's free, it's online, and you'll be amazed. If you want to know where are you from bias or unconscious bias, this will give you results. I did it myself, and I was totally blown away, by the result, because I thought, of course, I'm gonna pass with flying colors, but I was surprised with the results. So this is one thing that we can actually do that can make us understand at least where we are from everything. So talking about the solutions right now, I'm going to share with you some of the solutions that can help. First of all, become self-aware. And that means that we can identify our blind spots. Taking that test will help. We need to ask ourselves where our feelings are coming from. They feel either shame or guilt or whatever. And then ask ourselves, where did I learn? Did I learn this bias from a reliable source? Or I just find out that because I grew up this way, this is how I feel. Also ask myself, how many people do I actually know conform to that? And how many people do I personally know do not conform to that? Did it come from actual incidents that I personally went through, or it's just perceived feelings about others? Are my feelings just handed down from a last generation, from my parents, or not? So when you get that knee-jerk reaction, do not react. Observe for a second. It starts by knowing who we are, and that's what self-awareness. It depends on us first and more. Recognize that it's normal to have it, because we don't have to feel shame or guilty, because we all have it. But in purpose, become slow down our decision making, and become aware that bias might reduce the power on how we shape our decisions. Seek multidimensional feedback, obtain multiple perspectives from diverse people, and start building trust. Making small changing over time and leading by example. Find common ground, because no matter how different we are, we will always find common ground. Either we're parents, or we went to a certain school, or we live in a certain area, or even we drive the same color car. It can be as small as that. We need to create opportunities to build relations across differences. We need to start discouraging the formation of silos and cliques. We don't have to shame others when bias is acknowledged, but understand this is a normal reaction to human beings. We need to teach our employees to communicate with respect, and maybe monitor each other. Say, hey, you know what? I think this was said and I don't know what you meant. Maybe you can help me understand what you meant. Be willing to have an open mind and not become defensive. Creating new mental paths. We can actually, because of the new science of neuroplasticity, we can create new connections in our brain to new habits. And we can actually do that by practicing more and more new habits that we need to get used to. We need the reactions, and how we react to things that are thrown to us depends 100% on us. Realize that our assumption of what's acceptable or normal to us, is it the norm or is just normal to us? We need to start educating ourselves about maybe different cultures, different people, and ask questions in a respectful way. People would love to show you who they are. Have empathy. And empathy meaning that you put yourself in other people's shoes without the need to fix them or tell them what's wrong or even feeling sorry for them. Accept and do not tolerate. Accept people for who they are, not who you want them to be. Create a culture of inclusion in which we are actually adding more people, not subtracting people. We need to understand that at the end, we are all human beings. When you start thinking about it, we all want the same thing. We all want to be loved. We all want to belong. We all want to be safe. We all want the best for our families. We want to have an impact in the world. We want to have an impact on our workplace. And once we start looking at each other this way, regardless of our accent or our color or our age or our gender or our disability or our sexual orientation, will become a lot better place in this world. Thank you, Michelle.
Well, wow, Sahar. I'm going to jump in now because it's like this is the Q&A and the conversation part. You have no idea how this is the fun part of the webinars, you know, because that was fabulous. And you know, I'm going to ask kind of a big question. I think for those of us as professional women, I think so many times we don't know that we're being, let's just say, I don't want to say inappropriate, but, you know, we're dealing with different people from different backgrounds, different ages. You know, I mean, I know I hear from, let's say, younger women who will say, I'm so sick of hearing people talk about millennials, you know, and it's almost like it's that's an offensive word to them. And I know we could go down race or ethnic background or, you know, diversity of even
genders,
just who we are. Yeah. And it's like, but talk about just how can, you say be self-aware. What does that mean? I mean, if we don't know what we don't know, how can we as professional women be more self-aware in the workplace and in business?
You know what? One of the other part of awareness and emotional intelligence is being aware of others, or social awareness. And it depends totally on listening and observing. That means sometimes we say things, people will always give you a sign of how they're feeling, but their body language. Because remember, body language is more than 75% of our daily communication. So we need to be attentive enough, you know, and have that clarity in our mind to observe people around us, especially when they are different. And see, are we making them uncomfortable? Because when people are uncomfortable, they will give you a sign. They become anxious. They will start, like, for example, moving their weight from one leg to the other. Or they start looking everywhere else except looking at you. Or if it's start playing with the purse or with a pen or their hair or their jewelry, or their tone of voice might become even higher, or they might start speaking faster. There are a lot of signs that someone will give you to let you know, hello, I'm not comfortable here. Something is wrong.
That's pretty good. You know, I know there's a question here because I'm looking over some of the questions from attendees, Sahar, and, you know, here's one that says, well, what can I do if someone has bias against me? You know, because we all experience that. So what would be your recommendation if you feel, I mean, I don't know, there's so many different scenarios there, but the question is, what can I do if someone has bias against me or unconscious bias?
The thing is, like, it really depends what kind of bias, but one of the things that we can do, you know, is to find a way to start a dialogue. And the most important part is not becoming defensive. You know, is understanding that that person have empathy here, that person might not even know that this is how they're coming across. So maybe having a dialogue, and you know, in dialogue, we need to suspend three things. In a dialogue, we suspend judgment, we suspend taking a decision, and we suspend status, meaning if we are the manager or whatever. That means starting a dialogue and start by asking questions that are not attacking questions. Because a lot of people feel like, and I hear it a lot when we do diversity training, is like, yeah, but you know what? Some people have a chip on the shoulder. And that's not, you know, there might be, but that's not the regular case or the normal case. You know, so it's important to start a dialogue no matter how uncomfortable it is. Like, for example, if it's something that has to do with promotion, you know, if it's a manager for a promotion bias, they have bias, so they're not promoting me, for example. I would go to that person and say, I noticed that there have been promotions around us, and I would like to ask you for suggestion or your help to understand what would it take me to be able to get promoted, or what is it that I need to work on to get promoted. That's if it's a promotion thing. Or, you know what, I know that a promotion is coming up, and I know that someone can perceive that, I just got married or I have a young child, that it will interfere in whatever I'm doing. But I'm very focused, and and I love my job, and I love the corporations, and I love the organization. I mean, not necessarily this word, but find a way to show the manager or the supervisor that I'm interested to do the job and I'm capable of doing the job. And
Right.
always, talk to the other people. I don't want to say ego, but kind of like tell them, how can I do it? What do you think I should do? Can you help me understand? And this way, when you do that, people most of the time will never attack you, but will actually return the empathy.
I totally agree. And, this leads to another question by one of our attendees. And I'm just going to paraphrase it a bit because it's pretty long. But the scenario here, she's saying, I work with a boss, a man in parentheses, and he's always telling me that I'm too sensitive and I'm too emotional, in asking questions. And what do I do about that? And to me, there's, that's the unconscious bias between men and women. If I'm reading this right, in that scenario, what would you do? Because that happens to women all the time, right? Oh, you're too emotional, you're too this. I actually have had that as an experience myself in banking, where it's like, oh, you need to simmer down. You're too excited about this. It's almost like dismissive, which is that unconscious bias?
It could be. If someone told me that, the first thing I would do, I will honestly and sincerely look at my own attitude first and say, what is it that I'm doing that is giving them that impression, even if I'm not doing what they're accusing me of doing? But what is it? When I ask question, does my voice get low? Do I kind of, how is my body language when I ask my questions? Am I assertive? Am I assertive where I stand tall for what I believe in and my voice is the normal tone of voice? Or do I give them the impression that maybe I'm not sure of myself? Unfortunately, part of the communication that women do is, and we do it because we want to nurture that relationship. We want to show our capabilities. So sometimes, and I learned myself to stop doing that. We would say like, it's a beautiful day. Don't you think so? So we end the sentence by a question, and some look at that and see, oh, they're not sure of themselves. Instead of, I'm telling you, that's unconscious bias.
This is girl, that's a whole other webinar, right? Where you could talk about like upspeak, and I totally agree. Women, like, we hurt ourselves based on how we communicate, and I'm writing that down as an idea for another webinar, because it's like, that is absolutely it. But there's one share I want to give with you, and this is another question by an attendee, and I'm not cracking up at the question, but I'm like, oh my gosh.
But 1 second, Michelle. 1 second. I just want to make sure that I'm not coming across telling her that you are the reasons. No, I'm just saying, start by, like, basically what we do, we show our weaknesses and then we go strong, and then go to that boss and tell him, can you help me understand what you mean by that? I would really appreciate your help in letting me understand what you mean by that, so I can change myself, because I always, I'm in self-development, or I always want to be better, and I want to advance. So I'm asking for your guidance on how to get better.
I'm sorry. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you, and I was kind of going, man, the whole communication thing for women is a big one for those of us, right? But this one's another one. We got a ton of questions, so we're going to run out of time, but I'm going to try to hit as many as we can. One of them, they're explaining a scenario, and they're saying they were with an African-American woman. They are Caucasian, is what this is saying. And that they were in conversation, and this African-American woman to the Caucasian white woman was saying some derogatory things as the African-American women about African-Americans. And so she's saying, well, what do I do in that scenario? She goes, I was offended that here a woman of the same ethnic background is kind of dissing her own background. And she goes, she goes, what do I do in that scenario?
Okay, I'm trying to understand here. So there was a Caucasian woman and an African American woman, and the African American woman was the one doing the negative comments on African American women.
That's how I'm taking this question. She's saying that the African American woman was trying to be funny, and she was saying some things that were derogatory about her own ethnic background, and the white woman was saying, this is awful, is how I'm taking this, and she didn't know how to respond. If I don't have the scenario and the details, but I thought, well, that's an interesting question. How would I've heard, like, I don't know, I guess, think of it, I'm large as a woman.
Oh, what I would do, I would just say, what? I'm sure you don't mean that every single person acts like that, and I'm not sure that, without being aggressive, just like, I'm not sure that really applies to everyone that is from this background, because I personally know a few people that are totally the opposite of that.
You know what I like about your.
Uh-huh.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, what I love about your answer, Sahar, is that it's like you're looking for more clarity and perspective, right? I mean,
yes.
If we as professional women can really have a better understanding and clarification when we feel something is either being misunderstood or misrepresented or, not being kind of taken correctly, and all these scenarios we're talking about, it's having more of the conversation for clarity. Am I getting kind of the general message here? Because I like the approach that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Because this way people don't feel attacked, especially when you come to talk about things that have to do with who we are as human beings. You're talking to raw nerves, so we can become very easily irritated, and that's why we need to make the other person feel more comfortable.
Right. Well, and here's another one. This question is, and how can we help others pause enough to take in more information before categorizing? And I'm not sure the whole scenario there, but that's the question.
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but
I'm going to read into this. Maybe it's that people kind of assume and kind of put people in buckets before they understand the information being presented. Maybe, I'm not sure. So, for that individual that wrote that question, if you want to respond with another question, more clarity, I think maybe we can get there. Kind of only a final couple more here, Sahar, but I think the conversation for diversity and inclusion is a big one. What are some of the things that you see companies do that they're really embracing diversity and inclusion in their organization, right? I mean, there's things trending with like ERG groups or affinity groups or things like that. Are those effective? Do you find that those are effective? And is that
absolutely
okay? Share a little bit about what those are with our listeners and attendees.
ERG groups are the employee resources groups, or they call also affinity groups. And what they are is that people put themselves in communities or groups to represent something. And historically, it used to be like African American, Hispanic, women, mother, and now it's a lot more than that. Or millennials, or baby boomers, or Xers, and now it's a lot more than that. So people get together based even on ideas, like how to be socially responsible, or people that believe in something else, and that believe in a certain idea or theory. It really depends on the flexibility of the organization and how far they allow this ERG or affinity groups, or even if they allow them to start with. But the affinity group, what happened, like, for example, a lot of studios have ERG and affinity groups, and being in this group, they are opening the doors to communication between the leadership in these organizations and these diverse groups. And that it opens the door not only to communication, but also to looking at them and the value that they are adding, because they're making themselves heard. They become a voice to be heard as well. And actually, a lot of people have been promoted through these ARG and networking, because it's a kind of networking, and it gets into the mentoring part and the coaching part, and it really helps people advance. This is one of them. The other one is having diversity councils in organizations. But again, this depends on what the organization allows or doesn't allow. On a smaller scale, what people do, even if their own department or with the groups or the teams that they work on, they celebrate diversity. Like, for example, let's say February is African American month. September 15th to October 15 is Hispanic celebration month. June is Gay Pride. May is Pacific Islander. And what they do is during that month, they try to have, let's have potluck lunch, and let's have people from that background explain who they are, and let's have what does it mean to be from that culture, and what kind of music and pictures, and so people become educated. It's important to have also what we call cultural informants. Like, for example, AT&T, before they release a phone to the market, they go to their ERG groups or focus group, and they test the wording of the marketing they're going to use and the phones. And every culture will come back with comments, and that's they okay, maybe we need to adjust our wording. And because remember, marketing to different groups, to women, to men, to millennials, to Xers, to baby boomers, to different cultures is totally different. And that's why there is something called cross-cultural marketing.
Right.
And they ask them, and then they release the phone based on that.
It's funny to me because I think unconscious bias is such a big term, and that's awesome. I love that I'm seeing more companies go down that road of being more inclusive, and those are some great examples. It's funny though, and I would love your thoughts on this, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do I exhibit unconscious bias, And one of the things I guess I'm going to share, I hope this is good, it's very personal, but I'm realizing, even at least within our organization, sometimes I always bring up how much, I know you're going to laugh, my love of wine. And I'm thinking, gosh, am I offending others who don't drink, right? Or think that they're not being included because they don't, and it's not that, it's fun, it's social to me and all of that, but I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I feel pretty inclusive, but I know that is a common theme for me is, hey, this meeting after the meeting and our wine meetings and stuff like that. So I'm kind of like second guessing myself going, am I exhibiting unconscious bias? What are your thoughts on that? Because now I'm having a moment.
Thank you for saying that, because unconscious bias and diversity is not being politically correct. Okay? So we don't need to walk on eggshells. You are not saying that only people that drink wine will be favorites here. And you're not saying only people that drink wine can join our organization. So people cannot be too sensitive either. So it goes both sides. We don't need to walk on eggshells. You know what I mean? If you feel at a certain time, which I don't think it will happen, and I don't think you ever saw it, someone will get offended by that, you tell them, I noticed that my comment kind of took you back. Is there anything I said offended you? But I don't think that the comment of wine itself would offend people.
Phew. Okay, that's good. Well, I mean, we're all kind of looking for how we can be, less biased. Because I've heard you speak before on this subject with the Diversity Council where you and I first met, and I just think it's a topic none of us really think about as much. How we come across, how others come across to us, and then the question is, how do we act on what we feel is either bias, or do we exhibit bias? And here's our last question, Sahar. I got more clarity on this one question before. It says, since our brains automatically put people in a bucket, is there anything we can do to help others not categorize us so quickly? In a general sense, not sure, from an unconscious bias. I do think people assume, based on conversing, but I'm not sure the context there. But I guess when I'm interacting with someone and I feel like somebody's maybe misreading me or they're putting me in buckets, I just kind of go, just let me make a point. I want to make sure we're both understanding the scenario. I don't know what thoughts you have on that. And then we'll ask one final question, but any thoughts?
Well, the thing is, like, we can never control how someone else feels or thinks. The only thing we can control is 100% our reaction to how the other person acts, reacts, thinks. You know what I mean? It's just like, I cannot control how people think about me, but I can control my reaction to how they think about me. I don't know if that's
pretty
clear.
Powerful. I think that's pretty powerful. That is exactly it.
Is.
You know, I think the key point. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
We are the master of our own universe.
Mm-hmm. What I love is, I think, check for understanding, be clear, you know, also, you know, the whole sensitivity thing. I mean, I do see in so many different scenarios in business, women, men, you know, age differences. It's like, I mean, there are people that are dum-dums, and I'm saying a nice word here. I'd like to be stronger. And then there are people that just don't know, right? That they're, and that's what we're talking about is the self-awareness. But then we also don't want to walk on eggshells. So I'd love to continue on this conversation again and really focus it in on women and communication and, you know, how we can maybe solve more of when we feel we're in a situation with unconscious bias. So I want to say thank you to you.
You're welcome.
You've been an awesome thought leader. I know, you know, having you as one of our very first webinar, Women Lead Webinar Leaders was awesome because we're picking up and trying to find new topics and new things. So we had some great listeners today that I can see and attendees. I want to thank all of the attendees that jumped on because we are getting ready and we'll be back again soon with our next webinar series on how you, as a professional woman, can lead, achieve, and succeed more effectively in business. So thank you so much for joining us. And Sahar, thank you again for being just an amazing thought leader today.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me.